For generations of children, this was the most magical store on Earth. A giant warehouse stuffed floor to ceiling with every toy imaginable. Kids begged to go. It dominated the toy world for decades. And then it collapsed, crushed, under a mountain of debt that it never even chose to take on. This is the story of Toys R Us, and how a healthy, beloved company can be quietly killed by clever financial engineering. At its peak, Toys R Us was a titan. Its stores were enormous, its selection unmatched. It had a giraffe mascot that kids adored, and a jingle that got stuck in your head for life. For a long time, if you wanted toys, this was simply where you went. It grew into a massive chain with hundreds of stores across the country and around the world. Stick around, because the way it died is less about toys and more about a dangerous kind of debt. For decades, the model worked beautifully. Toys R Us was the destination. It even reshaped the whole toy industry, becoming so powerful that toy makers depended on it. Being the biggest toy store in the world gave it enormous influence. But by the early 2000s, cracks were appearing. New competition was arriving, and it was fierce, coming from two very different directions at once. First came the giant discount retailers. Enormous general stores started selling toys, often as loss leaders, meaning they'd sell popular toys cheaply, even at a loss, just to get families through the doors to buy everything else. Toys R Us, which only sold toys, couldn't afford to play that game. It couldn't match those prices. Suddenly, the destination store was being undercut by places that sold toys almost as an afterthought. And then came the second, even bigger wave. The internet. Online shopping, led by Amazon, began to explode. People could now buy any toy imaginable from their couch, compare prices instantly, and have it delivered to their door. The whole idea of driving to a giant store started to feel less essential. Toys R Us needed to adapt to this new world, fast, with heavy investment in its own website and modern stores. But here is where the real tragedy begins. In 2005, a group of private investment firms bought Toys R Us in what's called a leveraged buyout. Now, this is the key to the entire story, so let's make it simple. In a leveraged buyout, investors buy a company using mostly borrowed money. And here's the crucial twist. They don't carry that debt themselves. They pile the debt onto the company they just bought. Toys R Us was, in effect, forced to borrow billions to pay for its own purchase. Overnight, a company that had been reasonably healthy was saddled with billions of dollars in debt it had never chosen. And that debt came with enormous interest payments, hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, just to service the loans. That was money that could have gone toward what the company desperately needed. Modernizing stores, building a great website, competing with Amazon. Instead, it was vanishing straight into interest payments. This is the quiet, brutal heart of the tragedy. At the exact moment Toys R Us needed to invest heavily to fight off Amazon and the discount giant, it was instead drowning in debt payments, with no money left to fight back. Its stores grew tired and dated. Its website lagged badly behind competitors. It couldn't invest in the future because it was too busy paying for the loans that had bought it. The debt didn't just weigh it down, it tied its hands. Meanwhile, the competition kept getting stronger. Amazon got faster, cheaper, and more convenient every year. The discount stores kept undercutting on price. Toys R Us, starved of cash, simply couldn't keep up. Its sales began to decline. And with billions in debt hanging over it, even a modest dip in sales became dangerous. There was no cushion, no room for error. Every dollar was already spoken for. Year after year, the company struggled under the crushing weight of its interest payments. It tried to restructure, to renegotiate, to buy itself time. But the fundamental problem never went away. The debt was simply too big, and the business, squeezed by rivals, wasn't generating enough cash to both pay the loans and invest in survival. It was slowly being financially strangled, and everyone could see where it was heading. In 2017, Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy. At first, there was hope it might reorganize, shed some debt, and survive in a smaller form. but it was too late and the hole was too deep. In 2018, the company announced it would close or sell all of its stores in the United States. The Giraffe was going dark. A beloved institution, part of millions of childhoods, was shutting its doors for good. The human cost was enormous. Tens of thousands of employees lost their jobs, many of them longtime workers, and many initially received little or no severance, sparking public outrage. Toy makers who had depended on Toys R Us as a huge customer were suddenly scrambling. An entire ecosystem built around the toy giant was thrown into chaos. And children lost the magical store that had defined a piece of growing up. But here is the detail that makes people so angry. Many argue Toys R Us didn't have to die. Yes, it faced real competition from Amazon and discount stores, serious challenges that required serious investment. But it was the crushing debt from the buyout, the billions it was forced to borrow to pay for its own sale, that robbed it of the money and flexibility it needed to fight back. Without that debt, it might have adapted and survived. So what is the real lesson of Toys R Us? The first is a hard one about how modern finance can work. A company can be loaded with debt not because of its own decisions, but because of how it was bought and sold. That debt can quietly drain away the very resources it needs to compete and survive, turning a fixable challenge into a fatal one. The store didn't just lose to Amazon. It lost while fighting with both hands tied behind its back. The deeper lesson is about the difference between a struggling business and a doomed one. Toys R Us faced real problems, but many believe a healthier, debt-free version could have modernized and endured. Instead, financial engineering turned a tough situation into an impossible one. So the question the story leaves us with is this: when a beloved giant falls, is it always because the world moved on? Or is it sometimes because of choices made in a boardroom that had nothing to do with the customers at all? If you enjoyed watching this empire fall, subscribe, because next time we've got another giant that never saw it coming.